First day I arrived here would have been, I think, as far as I can remember, was the first Friday of March '59 when I arrived out here on site, and there was snow on the ground. I think only a couple of timber huts. That was there for workers, or for even the office. There was an office, timber offices over there as well, both for the ESB and for the main contractor. The main contract had just begun at that time. Previous to that, for the previous few months, or latter part of 1958, there was some preparatory work taking place on a time and material basis between the contractor, the eventual contractor, and the ESB. But many on site at that time. On the ESB side, Mr. Saunders was the site engineer, and he had a couple of subordinates, Mr. Brennan and Mr. Toomey, whom Mr. Toomey would be the main ESB man that I would have dealings with as regards setting out foundations, etc. And then there were a girl then in the office, Helen Corbett. She has since passed on to the next world, but she was there. And Jerry Crean was another man, a clerical man. Towards the summer of that year, the work started getting busier, and there was more need for extra staff, and there was a good amount employed then during that summer, autumn.
And I got word that I was wanted out here, there was a job for me out here, so I came out. But I know that was the first job I was put at, getting ready for those columns, the columns that supports it, and we had to make up a round. It went in two halves. You put in one half, and then in order to get them, you put them together in twos. They were bolted together and arranged up onto the ring beam, which was the start in the tower. So they were arranged. We'd done it, I think, in three sections, the three pours, in order to complete the ring beam. It was three pours. Thompson was the foreman on the tower, so I was left in. I was more or less his deputy then at that stage, and when he wouldn't be in, I'd carry on. And then the pour come up. He had the pour coming up on a weekend. I'd be on, have to keep charge of. I don't know the number of men we had now, I forget. It was in around the 30-ish. On the tower, you got height money, which made it very attractive. That was the beauty of working there. Now, after the ring was completed, I think it took 3 sections, 3 days to do the full ring beam. After that, we'd done a half a ring, and after that it was a full ring. Now it had to be cased up, and there was a lot of lads. There were handy lads that put up, they arranged the case, the shuttering up for the fill. You had steel fixers as well, arranging the steel, and they were. You got about 3 rounds a week. That was about a metre, 3 metres a week, raising the tower. It was about 3 metres a week. The first time that we used a hanging scaffolding. The scaffolding I know there was only one section went up where you went up on your ladders to get up to the top. You went up on your ladders, but the rest of it was a hanging scaffolding run right around the circumference of the tower, and they were lifted every day. When you get a pour, you'll be down 2 or 3 layers of scaffolding, and the bottom one will be brought up and put up on the top. So that was the first time that type of scaffolding was used. It was very successful. First job I was down as a shutter, putting up shuttering down at the tipplers down where the fuel comes in. Putting up shutters for concrete shuttering, for steel shuttering for the concrete in the bases, And I spent another couple of months then down at the pump house with the same job, See, for a start they had to dig a hole to get down to the base, and then it had to be shuttered
up to ground level, you know, and thousands of tons of concrete poured in naturally, like, you know. So the foundation of the ground was good. The ground was pretty good, you know, but there was I'd say they erred on the safety side. Anyways, there's some fantastic. Whoever goes digging them up, they'll find that there's a lot of concrete down there. But they're very good now. They're building the site itself is on good solid land. You know, there's no bog we're talking about. There might have been a little bog down near the Tipler side, but the rest of it was on gravel, really, gravel, sandy. You know. So I think at one stage there was only about one digger or one we used to call it a draught at the time, or for moving gravel. The rest was dug by spade and shovels, and you know. Now, if there was building a site, there'd be about £1 million worth of machinery pulled in on it, you know. That time there was only one, I think about one machine for shifting around machine, gravel or things, you know. I think there was a drag line for a while, all right, but it was only for different types of jobs, you know. There was one little crane as well, one mobile crane was here as well. That was the all of it.
August 61, I moved up here. Now the station manager in Arigna was Henry J. Matthews, who's still doing well, I understand. And Henry J. was there, and very interesting guy, no doubt about it. Three of us, myself, Donal O'Neill, God rest him, from Carrick-Siveen, Joe Cahill, who was in Ballyshannon, and somebody else. Oh yeah, Jack Kennedy, God rest him, he's dead too, from Ferban. And we were put in charge of different sections, you know. Fintan Maher, who you probably know, arrived later when Joe Cahill left to teach in Dublin and one of the colleges there. But anyway, my job was to install all the stuff in the 10 kV rooms, high tension, and the compound. Again, it's roughly the same thing I did with the Germans, and the same thing I did in Cliff as an apprentice with the Swedes. So actually it turned out that the breakers here had exactly the same type, almost, as the ones we installed in Cliff. Or, you know, power stations, so they're much the same, so we were very familiar with. And the breakers are much similar, although they're Siemens in Arigna. The ones here are German, you know, Sprecher and Schuh, so there's much difference there either. So it was plain sailing for us in the construction side, like, you know. So we installed all the stuff in the compound there, all the breakers and all that, at that time, and all the 10 kV equipment. They were great workers, and something I mentioned somebody else recently was, somebody asked me, did I see any difference between them and the fellas we had in Arigna and the fellas we had in Ballyshannon and that, like. And I always thought of them when I went back to project department for a period in Great Island, and I always thought of the fellas, of the workers we had in Bellacorick. A lot of these guys worked in England, you see, and they knew exactly what to do, you know. They were new to this thing. It wasn't hard work for them. They just did it. I had fellas with me, you know. Eddie Gillespie was one of the key fellas we had out there, you know, fantastic fella, telling yarns and whatnot, like, you know. And very, very good, like, you know, about his time in England, like. And I mean, all you do is say this, and this. Ah, yeah, yeah. A matter of fact, some cases some of them might ask you, like, are you not going to put timber over those cables to protect them, or going to put something over to protect them, or, you know, they were way ahead of you cases, like. They were great workers.
Come in there into the office, into John Corbett, the supervisor, and signed a form. I have no idea what I signed, but that was it. Onto the job straight away. No major instructions on health or safety or anything like that. At this stage they were installing the electrical equipment, and the fitters, they were installing their end of it, you know, and it was a hive of activity. There were, I don't know, I'd imagine a couple of hundred men. They had contractors here, many contractors, Babcocks and Wilcox. You had laggers. You had a Mr. Lapsley. He installed the equipment into the water treatment plant. My workmates there, well, there was Fincy Herbert, PJ Cuff, Paddy McHale, Martin McHale. Martin McHale, one of the finest guys. I went to school with him, and he's dead now, the Lord mercy on him. Lots of others, John Old Carey, Gus Cosgrove, Lord mercy, you know, Michael Corrigan, Jerry Maguire. Jerry Maguire, he was the shop steward. Jerry was a great guy. He later left the station and went on to the Midlands. Mickey Joe Rowland, he died here recently. Mickey Joe Rowland, it was a pleasure to work with him. He was a schemer and a planner, and we would spend many hours planning and scheming. Down then the road, the shop at the end of the road there, it was Anthony Gallagher, the proprietor there. Fascinating guy, a lovely guy, into Molly's, as we used to call it then, Molly Rowland. She was married to Ned Fergus, and it was the shop really, and anything you wanted, that's where you got your supplies.
Because I'm the longest serving member here in this station. I was here when it opened. The day it opened and the day it closed. I remember at that time when I got a job here with ESP, they told me I had to work for 25 years. I thought it was a lifetime. But now I found it good passing. Oh, well, I work with Paddy O'Boyle, Bernie Fine and Vincent Cleary, Johnny Leonard, Michael Lynn. Well, there was 3 shifts here. There was day shift was from 8 in the morning until 3:30. Evening shift was from 3:30 until 12 at night, and the night shift was from 12 until 8 in the morning.
We were paid 3 and 6 halfpenny an hour. That was it. From that on, I said things proceeded with, and the wages at that time wasn't in Ireland here wasn't great, but it was still a promise of being constant, which made all the differ. And everything was processing fairly well. In '62 then, I was still working with the Swedes. There were 16 of us picked to go to a similar station in Road, Offaly, and we trained to operate there. And we came back. We had brought this, it produced its first megawatts here on October 26th, on a Friday, on the afternoon of Friday. I remember the moment while I happened to be working on it. I wrote it there and I never forgot it. When it was very interesting sort of a job, you'd look when we got in on it, and fortunately we had 8 or 9 fellas now on the turbine side that were really good, and you'd like to have things as good for them. We looked after them as well as we'd look after our own care. You know, we had that in the interest in mind. We didn't want any overseers, like we took the intention ourselves of seeing that we would try to do the best we could, and fortunately we did.
I came in as a fitter turner, started working with Albert Klockner was his name. He was a German, putting in the fuel handling. So I spent 6 weeks with him down at the Tippler, and he did electrical as well. The other electricians wouldn't like to hear that, but he did all sorts of work. We worked on the sampler and the pulling in chain, the pulling out chain. He was commissioning those, having them on a push button start. The theory was that the rake of turf would come in and the pulling in chain would bring it in. It'd be tippled and the pulling out chain would bring it out without any human intervention, as the man said. This is the first mill P station that put in automatic pressure control on the boilers. They reckoned that they couldn't control mill peat automatically, but Henry Matthews had other ideas, so we used spare parts that were here to did a prototype job on the boiler. We put 2 feeders over on auto using spare controls we had. That was done in-house here. That worked, so we eventually put the 4 feeders over, and we eventually put the 2 boilers over. And they were doing it in other stations after that. But they got outside contractors to do it. We had more modular. We had 3 to 15 signals here, which was a change in technology. I'd say we were the first station of the older stations to do that. So it was easier to adapt to different systems for change, or put in add-on to systems than the older one. You see, a lot of the stations had common, I suppose they had common plant, Hallfelds put in for a lot of the stations, Siemens plant. We were hybrid here. We had Babcocks, we had Swedish equipment, we had German fuel handling. So we were sort of left on our own. We had to buy our own equipment and fend for ourselves. We wouldn't draw out of a common store as much as other stations would. And I'm talking about the electrical, mechanical and instrumentation side. But everybody was local here and they all knew each other. We all pulled together fairly well anyway. It was an odd few rows, but sure, I wouldn't worry about them.
On those days, you did a moisture for the whole day, but later on it became rake sampling, where you did a moisture on each particular rake, and it was paid for by the rake. And that was important because the criteria for payment was the wetter the peat, the less you paid for it. It was weighed in the belt weigher, and a mistake there could cost a lot of money, so you had to be very careful that you got it right, because you could be costing the company money, you know, or making it, depending on which way the mistake was, you know. You know, it was always a challenge, because particularly for me, when the environment became important, I became the environmental coordinator, because it was usually the chemist or production manager or whatever, but there was no chemist here, and the chemist that used to come visiting was already the environmental coordinator for Shannon Bridge. So I was asked to do that job here, but that was very interesting, because you were going from a stage where everything was fired into a hole and nobody gave a monkeys, to a stage where we had to come up with environmental procedures, waste procedures for everything from paper to scrap metal to oils, and not alone come up with a procedure, you had to put it in place and have streams there and incorporate that into an environmental management system. So that was all new to me, and then I had to, first of all I had to learn it myself, and then I had to pass it on to everybody else. So that was a major change, and you know, we got there. You know, we ended up with a pretty good environmental management system. So much so we've never had a major oil spill here. I think there was an oil spill back in 1962 or 3 or something, you know, a turbine oil spill. But we never had got fuel oil in the river or anything like that. And I don't think we ever killed a fish. And we are beside a very valuable salmon river, and the fishing rights of it are privately owned from here all the way to the sea. So you can imagine if we would have anything around, there'd be people up knocking at the door, you know. And that in itself was a major achievement for Bellacorick to keep that good record, you know.
I remember in the first year I was here, we were reletting the tower. You know, the lads were gone, and there was a carpenter came here, Phil McClune. His son used to play for Donegal, used to play football, Mickey McClune. And we were putting lats in the tower, and we worked 7 days a week from 7 o'clock in the morning till 10 at night for the 7 days for 2 weeks. And I got £28. And I said, gee, if you're getting this, you'd never spend it. It was the awfulest pile of money you ever seen. Like, and it was paid in cash that time, or paid in, you know, at weekends. And it was a fierce lot of money, like 28, but it looked fierce now, you know what I mean? You know, well, I was getting 11 as it was, and it was coming 103 times. And there was a great sense of, you know, in this station now, you know, besides going to other stations, you know, and you're going to meetings in Dublin, and you find out what's happening in other stations. Like, even though I was shift manager in the end, I could walk down into the workshop or the electrical workshop, talk to the lads, the same as if I was beating them outside the station. And it left the job so easy, like. And different people that came, the boss and all, like, and Lord Greenlee is here now, or whoever, John McManus or Nicholas Tarrant and Pat Knock, and all them did before them. You know, there was no distinction made when you went to the canteen, none at all. They talked about anything for football, they're mad in football here anyway, but any type of sport. And you wouldn't be afraid to pass some smart joke, like, you know, if you'd taken a good heart, it wouldn't be thinking, well, why did he say that now, like? You know, and it leaves a lot easier, because when you're doing a job, when you're in charge of any group, like when you're on shift especially, there's a lot of, you know, there's a lot of repairs to be done for electricians and fitters, and you've always to be things. So if you can go down and talk to them as normal, like a friend, they might say, well, to hell with him, he's landed again, but they still cannot refuse you, like, because you're so, you know what I mean? It leaves a lot, it's lovely, and the people that come, most people that come to the station here thinks, like, when they go there, I meet them again, you know, different managers. And there were some lovely fellas here now. And I was in NCC myself, I went into twice is all I was in it. And they always said, and you can be checked out, that when they were stuck and when they lost it, the one station they could be certain that it'd be on time. And if we were to come on load at 6 o'clock in the morning, we'd probably be synchronising at 3 minutes to 6. 99 times out of the 100.
You had a great crowd of guys here. You're a great crowd of guys. You had some characters, you know, but you had, for the most part, you're a great crowd of guys. any manager that ever left here, and I'll say this without fear of contradiction, any manager I ever heard making his going away speech would always praise the staff on the tremendous cooperation he got. But everybody cooperated with everybody else. You had no cliques, you had no infighting. That some locations were, I won't say noted for, but that it happened in other places, and you didn't have that here. As I said, you're great characters here. One winter, when there was, I forget what year, there was heavy snow. The night shift weren't able to get in, so the evening shift had to stay on, but they had no food. There was no food in the local shop, nothing. And they decided they'd get the key of the canteen. There's always a key of every place kept in the shift in the glass jar. So the key was got broke into the canteen, and it was just before Christmas. It'd be around the 20th, 21st of Christmas, of December, 22nd of December. Broke into the canteen. Lo and behold, they found a beautiful goose, or turkey rather, just cooked. A turkey just cooked that evening. Needless to say, there was no other food in the canteen. Needless to say, they went to town on the turkey and they ate every morsel of it. I saw the skeleton the following day, and it was like something, you see films of an animal in the desert where his bones were picked clean. Well, that's how it was. There was no bone broken, just picked clean. There was nothing left on. And when Kathleen McHugh, when she came in the following morning and saw her turkey, it was her own personal property that she had cooked. Apparently at the time there was something wrong with her cooker in her own house, and she decided she'd cook her Christmas dinner here in the station. And she came in the following morning to find her turkey had disappeared. It became ever after, that shift became known as the turkey thieves. Even when Kathleen got married, there was a telegram came from Alabama and the turkey thieves.
Had a huge contact later on with Bournemona when I went on shifts with day-to-day contact. Always in contact with them, and we find them wonderful people to work with. They were really helpful, and in regards bringing in the peace and that, they were top class. They were always willing to help, and you couldn't praise them enough, because they really would step out of their line of duty to help and to keep the station on load. There was many at the time that you'd be down to the last half an hour maybe, with breakdowns and that, and those guys often went 8 hours without eating a bit to get fuel into the station, because they had such a pride in the place, and they didn't want to say that they were the cause of the station coming off load or something for the want of fuel. So, but they were excellent, every one of them. Later years, you had a Crossmanina team that won the intermediate championship in the 1980, and you had a couple of members of that worked here in the station. You had Gabriel Welsh and Johnny Leonard and John Duffy, and all those people gave great service, and their sons are playing now for their respective teams in the area. And I suppose the highlight of the sporting events in this area had to be Crossmanina's All-Ireland's club success in 2001 when we won the All-Ireland Club title, beating Nemo Rangers of Cork, and Johnny Leonard was a member of that team. So Johnny's name pops up going back a long time. He was won a county minor medal in 1984 with Crossmanina, and an All-Ireland club medal with Crossmanina in 2001, and he's still playing in 2005, and I don't know what sort of vitamins he's on, but there's certainly no harm to get the name of them.
We had, I used to coordinate the Midland Region Sports too, like, you know. We had a great participation from here. We went up and we used to take the station awards 3 or 4 years between, and I mean, there were twice as many staff in Lanesborough, Ferban, Road, and, you know. It was great. No bother getting 2 full buses up to, between kids and families and everything, up to, generally we used to book Tullamore. Oh, great. I remember even Tug of War. Tug of War was great here. We used to have great training. We used to train for maybe half an hour at lunchtime, and, you know, there was great interest in it. But, yeah, and then it kind of went further that you had the Army, the Guards, ourselves, DSB, I think, in Bournemouth meeting together for a day. But the Army used to destroy. It's the only thing we could win the Tug of War. I mean, I remember those big Army fellas with 16, 17 stone and boots on them, and them tugged out and them marching and them coming on the rope, and our fellas, like, you know, Army fellas with bog shoes and you could pull the arse off them over the, oh, it was great, like, you know. And that's the only thing we could win, like, so you had national fellas, international fellas throwing javelins, and we'd be throwing maybe from here to the door and they'd throw it out the field. But it was very good.
I suppose at that time in 1970, the mill peat stations were generating a significant amount of the ESB's output, and there was quite a bit of recruitment of young people into the ESB at that time. As well as that, Ferban was the regional headquarters, and therefore there were a number, 4 or 5 young executive officers similar to myself. At that time, in the regional office, it consisted of payroll administration or wages, cost and management, and the stores. And at that time, I worked in the stores unit under Jerry Crean, whereas it was within the grounds of the station. It was basically independent of the actual generating station in Ferban. It covered, it had overall responsibility for all of the Midland peat stations at that time, Road, Shannonbridge, Allenwood, Lanesborough and Bellacorick. I stayed in Ferban until 1978. I applied for a job in Bellacorick as the station administrative officer, and I got the job that time, so I moved to Bellacorick in 1978. I would have been working, doing relief, as they call it, doing relief clerical or administrative work at that time in Bellacorick from some time before that. So I would have been familiar with a lot of the people here. I suppose the one thing I always remembered about the place from the very, very beginning was, you know, how friendly the staff were. There was no demarcation, there was no sort of gaps or barriers between different categories of staff. Everybody was, you know, welcomed you to the place, and went out of their way to ensure that you were at home in the place. And you know, it was always a very relaxed, comfortable working atmosphere, which I have to say remained right up till the last day that the station generated electricity.
In an overhaul, you had the oil pumps up on the turbine, the throttle valves, any pipe work that would require NDT inspection, and those people came every few years. Sometimes we had situations where blades had to be removed and replaced. We had the bigger overhaul. Then we had a thing called in-bell inspection, where the turbine rotors were removed from the casing, and we had Alstom Brown Boveri specialists over here to assist us in removing the in-bells, and NDT inspection for crack detection or whatever. Over on the boiler then, you would have valve replacement. You might have the burners would always need looking at. The burner mouths would need refractory. Ductings with the high sand content in the fuel would need replacement or repair, and they had to be removed down onto the floor. And we always had to look at the safety valves. Very, very important part of planting on the turbine, on the boiler. if you had valves passing, if you had valves at incorrect settings. And of course soot blowers, the mechanism that's used was used to steam clean the top of the boiler, tube replacement, nozzle replacement, and again valves and valve settings. Certainly in the last number of years our boilers needed a lot more maintenance. The boilers were pushing towards 40 years of age there a year or two ago, and tube erosion was becoming a problem. Our fuel, we were getting down to the bottom of the bog. There was a bigger sand content in our fuel, and with the draft in the boiler, the sand had an erosion, eroded the face of the tubes. So we had tube leaks, we had ruptures, particularly up in the superheater area. And there was a few mornings that we came in there and maybe one of the sets might be down off load due to a tube leak. And just again to say how good the lads in Bellacorick was, everybody would be asking, you know, what's wrong today? The set is off. How long was it going to take it back? I wonder what's wrong. And we had one great character down there, and he'd always say, I wonder will there be any curd and cake on it? Now what he meant by curd and cake was overtime. In other stations they had different words for it, but the one in Bellacorick was curd and cake.
Station as old as this, a lot of the work is what they call running maintenance, so repairing equipment, fuel handling was one that was given a lot of faults. And we're always installing new stuff because we're so old. It was always very interesting because it was a bit of new technology. When we were involved and we installed new oil burners at the time back in the 80s. There was always something. Sean of course was always looking for ways of improving things. There was always new work going on in the compound, so we were always involved in all of that, and we got great experience. You know what I mean? All around the station. There was no such thing as working in a particular area, and that was it. You got the full works, which was very good. The thing about Cork is the work ethic in it was always second to none. Any of the staff shift. I mean, I worked in the control room for a while as well. Is make sure that the job was done, make sure everything was working well. If there was a problem, get it sorted quickly. You know what I mean? If I was walking along by the boiler pan and there was a problem, they wouldn't wait to talk to the supervisor to ask me to fix it. Just to drag you in here, quick, have a look at this. Which was great because I mean the staff were interested in getting the place going. They weren't going to say, well, we'll wait and we'll report to our supervisor and he'll report to the electrical guy and he'll get the electrician come back in an hour.